Welcome back. The recent release of the book Gangster State, which details corruption allegations against ANC Secretary General Magashule, has put the issue of freedom of expression in the spotlight. We're having a conversation with Samkelo Mokhine, Executive Director at the Freedom of Expression Institute, Member of Council at SANEF, Louw, and from our Cape Town studio, we're joined by Zelda Holtzman from civil society organisation UniteBehind. Gentlemen in the studio here, Zelda, will come back to you shortly. I want to steer the conversation a little bit broadly and look at the context of the timing. Off air, we were just discussing the sort of confluence of events at the moment. There's a lot happening in South Africa at the moment. The elections are looming. We've got the Zondo Commission. There's a lot of pressure on the media, on journalists, both in television format, in newspapers, authors, to really inform the public about what's happening so that people can make informed decisions at the elections. I'm going to start with you, Samkelo. Do you think we, as the South African media, have a knee-jerk reaction when accusations are made against journalists, against authors, but people in the media specifically, of making attacking statements, of being unfair, of being biased? Do you think the media unfairly uses their public platform to say, oh, no, it wasn't us, this is our job, and then claim rights to freedom of expression when we haven't followed the rules?
No, I don't think so. But I think the issue of a context is very important. We are going towards elections. There are commissions on the go. There's been threats. I mean, the Karima Brown threat is just something that I could not quite fathom in terms of its detail and its viciousness. And now we've had issues with senior politicians really attacking in some way journalists. So I think there's really a confluence of everything. Meanwhile, the public is crying out for more. So with the Zondo Commission and whatever else, a book like the one that we've had from Louw Myburgh is welcome because people just want to know more details, because that's what they hear at the commission. So there isn't really a knee-jerk reaction from the media as far as I'm concerned, but the media needs to keep the pressure up because the public is also keeping the pressure up on the media.
Chris, in terms of the kind of back work that is done, because the public very rarely sees that. A book like this is not just released with no factual basis. Questions that are asked by journalists in press briefings are not just thought out in the spur of the moment. There's an editorial process behind that. There's sanction from stations, from editorial teams. Directions that channels take, that's also thought processes behind that and sanctioned. And although the media is supposed to be unbiased, there is no such thing as complete objectivity, because there's got to be some kind of a stance. What are we seeing happening when people, politicians, and not just politicians, react in this way to processes that have been followed? It seems like there's a disjoint somewhere.
So to your point of objectivity, what they always say about objectivity, the mission to achieve objectivity is achieving objectivity in itself, because objectivity is unachievable. I think that's very important to understand. If someone says to you they're completely objective, you know that they're probably not trustworthy in some way, shape, or form. I think that it's very important to understand that, journalists will have agendas around certain topics, but even that word agenda has become so weighted down, and it doesn't have to be such a word. Journalists, for example, who says, the air quality in Johannesburg is really bad. My agenda is to go and cover this and to go and show people why. So there's an agenda there. Now, that's not necessarily a negative agenda, right? So let's also just frame that in that manner. I don't think that Pieter-Louis Myburgh had an agenda in releasing his book other than wanting to tell people what's going on. And I think we just need to be very mindful if we lose that. And if we consider what the V&A Waterfront have done in this regard, they're actually feeding into that rhetoric around, well, I don't like your opinion, opinion, so I'm going to burn things, destroy things, and if the V&A Waterfront then says, no, I don't want you here, that means that those guys have won. It means that those guys have gotten what they wanted in shutting down somebody's opinion, somebody's thought, and someone's research. And to your point about the backstory, there is work that goes into every single story. And we've seen, issues around journalism come up over the last year or two around the Sunday Times and the Rogue Unit, et cetera, and we found out that the backstory there were major problems in that backstory and how the research was done and how the information had been garnered. A great example, again, is the Karima Brown situation. The reason Julius Malema got so angry and decided to tweet her address was he, maybe for the first time, got insight into how journalists work. And the message that she had sent was, look out for the big wigs around the table, figure out who they are.
Follow the story carefully, as any journalist would be instructed.
Absolutely. And the journalists would be instructed to find the big wigs for the specific reason that they are the decision makers, they are the policy makers. Now, we've seen in the media many, many times before where politicians would then criticize the media and says, you didn't speak to the right people. And all that Karima Brown was trying to do there was to ensure that the journalists there were speaking to the right people and not a junior person who really has no say, but could perhaps, wax lyrically on a microphone and say all kinds of things that the EFF won't agree with. So we have to understand that what Karima Brown did not warrant hate speech, because what Julius Malema subsequently did was incite hate speech by condoning what he surely inevitably could have seen was going to be violent threats against her, threats of rape. By the same token, the Pieter-Louis Myburgh's book, there is a whole backstory there that, that we are not interested in necessarily as the public, because it's quite boring, right? You've got to sit and go through millions and millions of pages of stuff. That's not something that, grabs the headlines. What grabs the headlines are the bits and pieces of information in there that come to a conclusive sort of idea around what Ace Magashule did in the Free State Province.
Zelda, from our Cape Town studio, I want to bring you in here again and find out from you why ordinary South Africans should care about what happened at the book launch in Sandton, and what impact you and your organization think this kind of protest action, what impact that has on the strength of our democracy.
Yes, thanks. I think it's a very important question. And we're taking the stance not because we're defending Pieter-Louis Myburgh or any author for that matter, but it's a fundamental right to freedom of expression, a right which wasn't achieved easily. It was a right that was achieved through struggle. And it's a right that we need to defend and that we need to protect. So the burning of the book and the violent opposition to the launch of the book is really a sad indication of the state of affairs. And in fact, on a number of levels. One, it shows the lack of leadership and the lack of civic education in as far as defending the democratic rights so hard won. And why that is so important for ordinary citizens to care about it is because if we allow the violent action against democratic principles, today it's the freedom of speech, and indicated by that, the burning of books is an indication of that. Tomorrow, people will be tortured for holding opposing ideas. And that is so reminiscent of a totalitarian state, one which we've just come through and fought against, the apartheid state. But also that the history of those type of fascist actions throughout history has to be opposed by liberal-minded people, by freedom-loving people, by people who hold democratic values dear. And we can't let that slip, insignificant as it might seem, because not everybody in South Africa are readers who would go out and buy the book. But it's not about that. It's fundamentally the principles contained in our Constitution that, as I indicated earlier, was very hard won through a struggle to attain democracy. So therefore, it is the plight of every freedom-loving South African to defend those rights so hard won, and that we shouldn't let that slip, as I said, because today it's the burning of books, tomorrow we'll go back to that system of torture when you hold opposing views. Therefore, it is incumbent on the leadership of all political parties, of all spheres of government, of all leaders in society, religious, business, civil society, all included, to take a firm stance to disallow such vicious, violent, fascist actions from whichever quarter it comes in society. We've got the right to defend our hard-won democratic freedoms.
Right. Thank you, Samkelo. I'm going to end off with you. And I want to talk about disinformation and read here fake news. But I want to move away from the term fake news and call it disinformation. And that comes via social media, via informal news platforms, online, in many different forms. How has disinformation increased the need for freedom of expression and freedom of the press?
Yeah. The thing is, without freedom of expression or freedom of speech, you cannot even start to challenge some of those fake facts or inaccurate facts. So we're not saying people should be opposed to what has happened solely because of it having been rights that were impinged before and were hard-won. These are fundamental to a democracy. If a democracy is supposed to work and work well, these are very fundamental. And if you let slip, then you can only blame yourself when you no longer have those rights.
And of course, some people say that because there is disinformation out there, that we should have more regulatory bodies. We should censor the media more to protect the viewers out there from receiving this information. But that's counterproductive.
No, absolutely. Education is one. The public should be educated around the need to verify facts, and education as well. Just incidentally, I thought it might be an opportunity to educate people at the V&A waterfront about the fundamentals around the freedom of speech, and even as active or just citizens, they need to protect those rights.
And of course, in order for the public to be educated enough to make up their minds about what is fake news and what is factual, they need to have free access to information. Thank you very much for your participation. I've been speaking to Samkelo Mokhine, Executive Director at the Freedom of Expression Institute, Member of Council at SANEF, Chris Louw, and from our Cape Town studio, we were joined by Zelda Holtzman from civil society organisation UniteBehind, and we've been speaking about the importance of freedom of expression.